So here we are with our old 98 Safari. We're going to change you've got some bad vibration in the front end as the rotors are shot. So we're going to change the rotors on this thing. First thing we got to do is crack the nuts on this wheel. So we've got the jack underneath it, and we got the pressure off the wheel, but we just leave it touching the ground slightly so it stays, keeps from turning around, so we can get these nuts off here. So we're going to go ahead and take the wheel off. Alright, so we got the wheel off here, and you can see that it's all one piece. The rotor is part of the bearing housing. So this isn't just a matter of pulling the rotor off and putting a new one on. You have to pull the bearings apart to get this rotor off. And we begin with taking that caliper off. It's just two bolts on the back side of it, and so we're going to take that caliper off. That's this part there. It's the housing for the brake pads, and it functions as the mechanism that squeezes or pinches the brake pads against the rotor while you're driving. And when you push your brakes in, this caliper mechanism, it pinches against the shiny metal part here and slows the van down. But quite often this piece here will come off separately from this piece, from the hub. That's not the case with this. It's a heavy duty system here, so the rotor is part of the hub. So you have to pull the whole thing off and replace the whole thing. So we're going to start with pulling this caliper apart. So you can see here that we have the caliper there, and the wrench goes on the back side of it, and there's one there and there's one on the back side on the bottom, and it's just two of these long bolts that goes right through, and you'll have to check to make sure that you have the right socket for it. Make sure it's the exact right socket, because even if you don't get a perfect snug fit back there, you could strip the head on it, and then you're in big trouble. So you want to make sure you get the exact perfect socket for that. That bolt comes out, the one on the bottom comes out, and the caliper just slides right off. Alright, so we've got the caliper off. It just slid right off of the rotor here. And you want to inspect the pads. These pads are not very old. You can see there's a lot of thickness there on those. And these were great pads when I bought them. And you can see there's lots of thickness. There's all kinds of brake pad there. And they're in good shape. There's no cracking. There's no flaking. These were high-end brake shoes when I bought them, or pads rather. So we're going to go ahead and reuse those. And make sure you inspect everything before you put it back together. Make sure that if anything needs replacing, you should do it. There's one area you shouldn't cut corners. That's your brakes. All right, so there's our rotor. The caliper has been removed. It's out of the way. And remember, we said that this is an onboard rotor, so we have to take the whole hub assembly apart, and the rotor is part of that. So we start with popping that cap off of there, and you just use a screwdriver and maybe a hammer. And underneath there you'll see a bunch of grease and a bearing assembly. So let's go ahead and take that. Alright, so you can see here that we've got a cotter pin there. We're going to pull that out. And then we're going to take off this big nut here, and then behind that is a giant washer, and then your bearings are behind that. It's all held together. I've cleaned the grease out around it. It was packed with grease, as they all should be. And so again, we have the pin that comes out, which locks the nut. Pull the nut off, take the washer out, and then the bearing will be on the back side of that. Okay, so we've got the pin out, we've taken off the nut that was holding that whole assembly on there. Now you can see there's a washer here, and behind that a bearing. So you can see this whole hub is moving. You see that? So essentially when I pull this hub off, see it's all coming off? That will bring the washer off, the bearing behind it, and will expose the bearing that's on the back side of it. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. So here's the back side of the rotor, and you can see that there's a seal here and a bearing inside. So what you want to do is you want to take the seal out, which you've already done. You just pop it out with a hammer, and of course you'll have a new one to replace it with. And inside there is the bearing, and we've already inspected this bearing, so we're going to reuse it. You have to inspect the bearing, make sure it's not unusable, in which case you just replace them. But these are okay. We've inspected them and they're in good shape, so we're going to reuse our bearings. And so that's the inside of the old rotor. Now here's the new rotor here, and there's the new seal that we got for it, and you can see it's all new and shiny in there, and we're going to get it all dirty with grease and pack it really good with grease and grease it up, and then pack the bearings with grease, with new grease, which we got there. Make sure it's bearing grease, and we're going to go ahead and do that. So you can see here we've greased up the race, they call that, in there, but more importantly we've got this bearing and we've packed that full of grease. So essentially on the back side here you can see there's a gap there, and you want to pack that full of grease before you put it in. And take your palm and really pack it in there, because that is your lubrication for your bearing. And then we just place that bearing inside the race there, and the race is what the bearing will be rubbing up against while it's going down the road. And you want to take your seal, so grab that seal there, and turn around. Okay, it's going to go just like that, and just leave that alone, just like that. And you have to pound that in. You have to pound that in gently but firmly and evenly. You can't take a screwdriver and pound it around the edges because you'll wreck it. And lots of shops generally, they'll have a special tool that fits perfectly in that groove, and they just pound it in there. But you're going to take a block of wood or something and just gently but firmly pound that seal in so that it goes in securely. That's what you're going to do. Alright, so our bearing's in and our seal is in, and how we did it was we took a 2x2 and we put it on top of the seal, and we just beat on it with the hammer gently but firmly. And so we basically just went like that with it, hitting it with the hammer, and it went in nice, and it's in there actually perfect. And so don't be afraid to pack some more grease up in here, because you're going to seal this up and you want to have lots of grease in it, not too much, but you want to have lots. And we're going to show you how to finalize the packing of the grease later on down the line, but that's how you do the back side of your rotor. Alright, so there's our old spindle, and you want to make sure you get that really super clean and examine that. You want to make sure it's not, you want to make sure it's really smooth there, and it's not all scarred up. This one, again, it looks pretty good. We actually had this apart a couple of years ago and examined it, so we're keeping a close eye on these vans. They're heavy, and we've done some towing with it, so they take a real beating when that happens. So, alright, so we're ready. We're just going to put a dab of grease on it. Here, this is where the inside bearing goes, and this is the outside bearing there. So just a bit of grease on there just to help it along. You don't want to have a dry start when you go to take off. So now we'll grab the rotor assembly and put that on. Alright, so we've got the new rotor on here, and being very careful that you don't scratch up the bearings as you put it on. You want to be very careful, kind of like when you're playing the board game Doctor. You don't touch the edges, and just be very careful putting that on, because you don't want to scratch everything up as you're reassembling your bearing assembly here, which is part of your new rotor. So now we're going to do the outside bearing assembly here. Okay, here's the outside bearing. We cleaned it up, we examined it, it's in pretty good shape, so we're going to go ahead and reuse it. So here's the back side of it. We're going to repack that with grease. We've cleaned all the old grease out of it, and we're going to just really pack the grease in there, and then really pack the grease in here, and then we're going to put it on the spindle. Alright, so we have pushed the rotor in by hand so that it is flush against the seal. The seal is all the way to the back. Now we're going to insert the outer bearing, put the skinny end in first, because then it matches the race on the inside of the rotor. So go ahead and do that. Alright, so we got that bearing in there. Now that bearing, if you don't put that on perfectly straight, it'll bind up on you because it's designed to be a tight fit. So make sure that bearing goes in there perfectly straight. So now it's in. So now we're going to put our washer in and the nut. So here's the washer, and we're going to clean that up and put that on. Okay, so there it is. And you can see it's got a key on it, and that key lines up with that slot there. You see that? So we'll put that on there like that, and then making sure we're cleaning everything up. This is our nut, so we're going to clean that nut. Alright, and we're going to put that on gently, and make sure those grooves are pointing out toward you, because those grooves are what keeps the whole thing from falling apart as you're going down the road. Alright, so we've got this nut on here, and it's really important, guys, that you take it and you tighten it, not really over tighten it, but tighten it really snug, okay, and then back it off, okay, and really you're just setting up the grease in there and just really packing the grease in there. Tighten it up really snug, and then back it off again. Now this time we're going to back it off to the nearest hole, if you can find it. Take your cotter pin, poke around there, see if you can find a hole. Now here's the test. You don't want this to be too snug, right? You want it to move freely but be tight. And you don't want any play in there. So as long as there's no play, but it moves freely, you got yourself a done deal. Now what you're going to do is you're going to fill this area, this cavity here, with grease. And then you're going to clean out your hubcap here. You're going to clean all the old junky old grease out of there and put new grease in there as well. And this will actually feed grease to your bearings as it needs them. But you've already packed it full of grease and you've done a good job with it. So that's next here, is to fill this cavity here. And when you put your pin back in, make sure you tap it back in gently, right? Get that all the way down in there, and then turn the bottom piece to the side so that this pin doesn't come out. If that pin comes out while you're driving down the road, you're in big trouble, mister. So don't let that happen. But now you've just changed the outboard rotors on your GM Safari, and you've done a good job. Make sure you inspect your bearings and your brake shoes, pads rather. Make sure everything is in good shape. If it's not in good shape, if there's any question at all, change them. You don't want bearings disintegrating on you going down the road. That's not fun at all. So hey guys, there, now you've just done your own front end bearing job and rotor job, and you've done a good job with it. Thanks for watching.